Now, with reaction to my conversation with Bishop Joseph Strickland, I'm joined by the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of the CatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Gentlemen, I want to get your reaction to what you just heard from Bishop Strickland. Father Jerry, as a canonist, your thoughts on the fact that the bishop and the church have yet to really be given a fulsome reason for the removal, though it's clear the bishop was informed of at least what that report revealed, and for the first time, we heard him tell us what those reasons were.
Well, yeah, this is highlighting the canonical irregularity of what went on here just from a procedural point of view. He said that he got essentially, he got an email letter which said essentially what the bulletin of the Daily Bulletin of the Vatican said, which is that he's been relieved of the diocese. He said that reasons were given to him by the nuncio, Cardinal Pierre, which included that he had lacked fraternity with his fellow bishops, that he didn't support the Synod on synodality. Also mentioned was the Latin Mass. Other things were mentioned because he didn't give an exhaustive list, Bishop Strickland. But let's just go back to this. It is not a canonical offense not to always agree with your fellow bishops. St. John Fisher showed that in the time of Henry VIII. As regards implementing the prohibitions on the Latin Mass, well, bishops have to make decisions on how they're going to figure out how to help people in their diocese. He mentioned he has a Fraternity of St. Peter parish. They're not subject to Traditionis Custodes. They can continue their activities. So that was troubling. But really what's troubling is all of that should have been set down in a document so that the people of Tyler would know this from the mouth of the authority that's emanating this decision, the Pope and his nuncio. They owe it to the people of Tyler to say, your bishop did the following things which required the Pope, in his judgment, to relieve him of duties. Now, reports, as you mentioned in the interview very well, Raymond, people were saying, well, he has administrative irregularities. Well, he said, the nuncio never mentioned anything like that, and the visitators never mentioned anything like that. I've never heard any report in the press that he was mismanaging his diocese. He averted to the fact there were disagreements with some decisions. Well, guess what? No bishop gets 100% agreement on things he does. That's, again, not a reason to remove him.
Bob, we have seen quite a few occasions in which Pope Francis has used his prerogative to remove bishops. Bishop Martin Hawley, formerly of Memphis, Bishop Daniel Fernandez Torres, I mentioned him in Puerto Rico, come to mind. Do you see a pattern in these removals?
Well, Raymond, I just think that, we're digging for reasons that could be published, that could be listed, and could reasonably be debated. I think it just comes down to the fact that the Holy Father at a certain point thought that he was kind of a thorn in the side. That's just my own kind of global reading of what happened here, because it kind of beggars belief that the very outspoken bishop here in the United States, among over 200 other bishops, happens to be the one guy whose administration calls for his removal from office. We know that all sorts of problems exist in other dioceses as well. As far as the Latin Mass is concerned, a priest friend of mine pointed out to me recently that 100 dioceses in the United States did not implement Traditionis Custodes as it was requested to be implemented, including Boston, in which the Boston Cathedral, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, is very close to the Holy Father. Even there, it has not been implemented in the way that it was requested. Now, I think that at certain points, even for me, I think the bishop made some mistakes in that tweet that he put out in May, where he said that the Pope is the Pope. He admitted that his election was legitimate, but I reject his undermining of the foundations of the faith. Reject is a strong word. He would have been, I think, much more prudent without being not outspoken to use some idea about I disagree or I think what he's doing is undermining. That said, what it basically comes down to in the end, I believe, is just the Holy Father kind of figures that he's not my guy. I don't think he understands, because people in Rome don't understand the United States, that Texas is a conservative place, and to be a plain speaker in Texas is different than to be a plain speaker in, say, Milan. So I think he was entirely appropriate, probably misspoke a couple of times. But if we're going to look for a cause, I think that the cause is simply that the Pope he resents the way our bishops have resisted him, and this was a good opportunity 1 week before the bishops are meeting in Baltimore to make a point.
Yeah, no. This was clearly a warning shot, meant to get everybody's attention. Get with the program, guys. That's clearly what's the message here. Father, you made a great point in your last answer, and it concerned requiring the people of God to know why you're removing their shepherd. We're on this synodal path where we're walking with people and we're listening to people. How about talking to the people and telling them why you're doing the things you're doing, like removing their bishop? But tell me about the canonical requirements here. And is it not a denial of due process to fail to give reasons for that dismissal, clear reasons, canonical reasons for removing a bishop in this way?
Yes, this has to do with the specifics of canon law regarding the office of a bishop, and he is subject to canonical sanction if he commits a canonical crime. He could also be subject to privation of office if there was some serious matter that wasn't specifically covered in a canonical crime, but nonetheless was a great offense against the unity of the church or the proper administration of his diocese. Things of that sort. If he were judged to be either psychologically or physically impaired, he could be removed for that reason. That's all reasonable. But let's get down to the point here. If you are going to essentially punish a man for things that he's done, those things should be clearly stated. They should be laid out. The law under which you punish him or think of punishing him should be also specified. And he needs the right of self-defense. The idea that since you send some visitators and they met with him for an hour after the end of the meeting, and then the next time he gets an official communication, apparently, is when the nuncio calls him in and says, please resign, and these are the reasons. This is not a canonically proper procedure. If the Holy Father wanted to convene a trial because he committed a canonical crime, please do that. An administrative process is an alternate means, but in an administrative process, you have the right to read the evidence that's been gathered against you. For instance, did the visitators make a written report, and was that ever shown to Bishop Strickland so he could review those findings and then offer a different interpretation? There's no indication of that. The Holy Father didn't call him in to clarify anything that the Holy Father was concerned about. This is not how you should treat a successor of the apostles. In Vatican II, it's made quite clear that the office of bishop is not to be treated as a branch manager delegation from the Roman pontiff. In other words, they're not there sort of like monsignors. Monsignors are appointed by the Pope, and he can remove the monsignor if he wants to, and they're basically subject to the Pope. We're all subject to the Pope as the supreme authority. I don't deny that. I never would. But the supreme authority also fits into the nature of the apostolic college, which is a successor to the apostles. And the apostles were given office by Christ himself, so are their successors. That's not being respected in practice here.
Yeah. There are many things that are disturbing about this case. Not only, it looks like the report or bits of the report were shared with him as he was told he was being removed from the diocese, and not in advance. And in a time of mercy, we keep hearing about mercy. Look, we've got sexual abusers and miscreants running all over the Vatican, okay? Some still wearing mitres, and nobody does anything. In fact, we move them from place to place. We get them reincarnated somewhere, and then we move them back into position. And yet, this guy, who may have spoken out of turn, may have said something that was even inflammatory to some in the Vatican, he's, it's like off with his head instantly. No mercy, no correction, no room for improvement. I don't see how that helps anything. And I also don't see how it helps the Catholic in the pew in his diocese. But back in September, former head of the Vatican's doctrinal office, Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, had this to say about Bishop Strickland's apostolic visitation. Here's what he said. Yes, it is terrible what's being done to Bishop Strickland, an abuse of office against the divine right of the episcopate. if I could advise Bishop Strickland, he should not resign under any circumstances, because then they can wash their hands of it. A bishop can only be deposed by the Pope according to the commandment of justice if he has been guilty of something bad: heresy, schism, apostasy, a crime, or totally unpriestly behavior. And e.g., the pseudo-blessing of people of both sexes in extramarital relations, which insults God and cheats people of their salvation. That's the quote. Actually, there are a number of cardinals, certainly in Germany, doing just that. Nobody says a word. In fact, they're welcomed into the papal palace. Father, the cardinal, or Bob, I'll go to you. The cardinal speaks of a crime of some sort being necessary to justify the removal of a bishop. Where's the crime in this case?
Yeah, I think you need a microscope to find where the crime is. And you're quite right to point out that we have quite open flaunting of rules from Rome. We have a bishop in Germany, as you rightly say, who's already instructed his priests that they are allowed, if they wish, if they judge it appropriate, to bless same-sex couples. Look, the very cardinal who's been running the Synod on synodality, Cardinal Hollerich, came out a couple of years ago and said that modern science has demonstrated that the Church's teaching on homosexuality is wrong, which is already absurd. And then he affirmed that the Holy Father believes the same thing. Now, if you want to look at somebody who's being doctrinally wild, you would look at a statement like that, and there should have been a correction from Rome saying, no, the Holy Father obviously would never believe such a thing. It's contrary to Catholic teaching. But yet Cardinal Hollerich just went on his merry way. We never heard a peep out of the Vatican, and he's been running the Synod on synodality for the past couple of years. So, look, we can drive ourselves crazy trying to find some rational account for this, but I think we know that what it boils down to is he was an outspoken person who has a different point of view about where the future of the Church ought to go, and in his diocese it may be slightly different, because we believe that there ought to be a diversity within unity in this Catholicity. So just to me, it seems unfair. The Pope has a right to do it, but you really want to say, Holy Father, really don't. This doesn't help you with Catholics in the United States.
Yeah. Bishop Athanasius Schneider is really one of the few bishops who have come out vocally about this situation. He claims that this is a purge of traditionalists. Here's his quote. He put this on X the other day. The one charge which is now sure to secure severe punishment, he's quoting St. Basil here, is the careful keeping of the traditions of the fathers. The deposition of the Bishop of Tyler, His Excellency Joseph Strickland, signifies a black day for the Catholic Church of our day. We are witnessing a blatant injustice towards a bishop who did his duty in preaching and defending with parrhesia the immutable Catholic faith and morals, and in promoting the sacredness of the liturgy. That's Bishop Athanasius Schneider. He wrote that on November 12th. Father, your thoughts on Bishop Schneider's defense, and does this put him on the chopping block?
Well, he's similar to Bishop Strickland in that he's both outspoken and media savvy, in the sense that he's, conversant with all the modern means to communicate with the faithful throughout the world, which, by the way, is part of what Vatican II said is what bishop's responsibility. He's not simply to be responsible for his diocese. He also has to have a concern for the whole church, and that's what these bishops have done. They're not the only ones. There are many bishops out there who are doing good things in this regard, but, Bishop Schneider's essential point is correct. Someone who defends vigorously the doctrine of the faith is persecuted. As you mentioned, and Bob just mentioned, these different bishops who contradicted. I was completely stunned to read that Bishop Johann Boni of Antwerp recently endorsed euthanasia, mercy killing, in certain cases. This is a direct contradiction of the Ten Commandments. This is a Catholic bishop telling people that it is a good thing to murder people who are either old or sick. Now, can you imagine under any other pope that would not go contradicted and that bishop would not be called in and reprimanded and called to recant that? I mean, this is outrageous. I can't express my anger enough, and I think that's an appropriate reaction, by the way, A bishop is sent by Jesus to go out and preach the gospel. This man is preaching what the Nazis did, which is euthanasia. That's one of the biggest things. Bishop von Galen, who is now, I believe, Blessed von Galen, protested against euthanasia policy in Nazi Germany. He's a hero for that. The bishop in Antwerp is now sitting there in his episcopal residence telling people it is okay to kill people who are sick or old. This is an outrage. Bishop Strickland doesn't deserve to be removed. Bishop Bonney, if he doesn't recant, he should be removed. Now, it's sad to say we've come to this point, but this is the chaos that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. I want to return to that apostolic visitation of Bishop Strickland in Tyler. Bishop Gerald Murray, I mentioned him earlier, formerly of Tucson. He seemed an odd choice to lead this type of investigation, given his controversial ordination of a man, a student in his seminary, who turned out to be a serial abuser, and he allegedly knew of the charges against the guy, and he ordained him anyway. Bob, your thoughts on this visitation? I mean, it seemed the rig was in from the beginning, given the people conducting the visitation.
Yeah, I don't have to confess, I don't really know very much about the two bishops. I did know that about Bishop Kikanis, but we have to assume that they were selected for a reason, because they would come back with some material. We've heard certain reports that after they did the visitation, their judgment that that Bishop Strickland's continuing as Bishop of Tyler, Texas, was no longer tenable, I think is what the word that they used. So. Look, you can obviously produce whatever outcome you want by choosing people to conduct a process like this. But I agree with Father entirely. The way you prevent an injustice from taking place is, this is why we have canon law in the first place. This is why we have secular law in the first place. We are not run by a government of men. Now, we do have to respect the Holy Father, has special authority from God himself, but we prefer not to be governed by an order of men, but rather by a legal process that makes sure that there's fairness to everyone. It's quite clear to me that there was no fairness here, whatever they think they say they may have discovered in that diocese.
And Father, there is this mismanagement or misgoverning narrative that has been set in motion as the reason for Bishop Strickland's removal. We heard today that that really is not the case at all. In fact, it wasn't even suggested that such a thing was going on. But as I mentioned earlier, you have that Father John Beale, the canonist at CUA, who says that this is an administrative, not a punitive action. And now Austin Ivory, the Pope's biographer, has weighed in. He put this up. The narrative that Strickland and his supporters are deploying, that he was removed for what he believed and preached, is denied by the facts. This was an administrative, not a penal act. Strickland misgoverned his diocese and has been removed for the good of the faithful, Austin Ivory says. First of all, Father, how does Ivory know this, and what are the facts here?
Well, we've learned the facts from the man himself. Christophe Pierre, Cardinal Christophe Pierre, never mentioned mismanagement as a reason for his removal. Now, regarding Father Beale's opinion about administrative removal, that's a conjecture, and he himself admits in that interview that there is no procedure, meaning there's nothing been written. There is no canons about removing bishops administratively. There are canons about removal and transfer of pastors. It's the final section of the Code of Canon Law. Those are called administrative proceedings, and they're done because the bishop judges that that priest is either needed to be serving in another parish where his talents can be used, or that he doesn't have enough talents in the particular parish where he is, and therefore he has to go somewhere else. There is no administrative removal, meaning that this has nothing to do with anything substantive. It's simply a judgment by the bishop, the Pope, that Bishop Strickland can serve better somewhere else. In fact, he's not been given a new assignment. So can't be viewed in light of that earlier code, the code procedures regarding pastors. So, the Pope, this is a big question. People say, is the Pope an absolute monarch? No, he's a monarch. He is the lawgiver, but he himself is subject to the divine law, the natural law. And if we're going to have canonical order in the Church, then he should follow the procedures that he himself is obliged to by the fact that the Code of Canon Law does not claim an exemption from all the procedural matters simply because you're Pope. And we've seen this with decrees. The bishop mentioned that he got a letter. A letter is not a decree. A decree has a formal character in canon law. It enacts a provision of law. It states summarily, if necessary, the reason for that provision, and then it's guaranteed to be given by the authority who issued it, in this case, the Pope. So, can the Pope exempt himself from giving decrees? Sure he can, but he needs to tell us he's done that. In this case, we're just basically it's sort of like getting a telegram in the old days. You open the telegram and find out, something happened. Well, that's not how bishops should be treated.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the whole thing is wacky, let's face it. And look, I'm sure we're targeted now and will be targeted for daring to even speak of this, because this is the truth. We're putting the whole thing out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what was said, what wasn't said, and the fact that there are a lot of oversights here. But here's where it all comes down to for me. And this story leapt out at me, and I want your quick reaction to it. We're almost out of time. The Bishop of the Diocese of Brooklyn, earlier this month, Robert Brennan, issued a letter citing an alarming statistic. This is what everything we've talked about since this show started, and really in the last 27 or 28 years, is about. There has been a 40% decline in Mass attendance in the Diocese of Brooklyn over the last 5 years. Bob, this is not the only diocese where this decline has been reported. Why do you think this is happening now?
Well, look, we can hopefully say a large part of that had something to do with what happened during COVID. But there's clearly something else. I mean, all the studies that are being done of Mass attendance in the United States show in some cases, slow, but steady erosion of the practice of the faith. Something like 70% of so-called Catholics in the United States never darken the door of a church. Of the 30% who do, maybe 25% actually do kind of show up on a weekly basis. But these things are declining, and it means that there's something that is missing in the church's outreach. One of the statements that Cardinal Pierre made to America Magazine last week before this bishop's meeting started is that nobody goes to church in the United States. Now, this is preposterous. He's been here 7 years. He ought to know something more about that. But it is true that there is a continuing erosion. And rather than talking internally about listening to one another and synodality, we really need to be out talking about the gospel, that we're not simply a church of listening, we're a church that is a teaching church as well. And we've had 40, 50 years of very poor catechesis, and it shows up in those statistics about what's happening in Mass attendance.
Yeah, well, Father, these statistics predate COVID. 5 years. It's a 5-year decline, not a 3-year or a 2-year decline. 5 years, 40% drop-off. If that holds, you're going to have like 4 people left in the pews. How can you keep churches open? What do you think are the root causes here? Is it this confusion? Is it this doublespeak, this back and forth? You can have transgendered people baptized, but don't join the Freemasons. I mean, this is like within a week what we got from the Divine Office.
Yeah, those statistics are very disturbing. I was born in Brooklyn. I was baptized in Brooklyn, St. Charles Borromeo Parish in Brooklyn Heights. Brooklyn's dear to me. But this is a sign that is widespread in the U.S. It is sad to say, after the council never intended any of this. The council was about renewing the faith and bringing people closer to Christ. But after the council, many people took it to be this. Catholicism used to be a difficult religion with a lot of demands. Now we're going to make it easy. Well, the first thing that people got in their mind was, I don't have to go to church every Sunday, get some more sleep in. Now that has trickled down over time, and then combined it with a lack. The Catholic school system in the United States is in collapse, at least in areas such as where I live in the East. I mean, we're closing schools all the time, and without religious women to teach, often Catholic schools, the religion program is not what it used to be. So, lack of training, lack of seriousness, treating religious obligations as your choice rather than something that you're required. We are required to worship God. Okay, let's put it. This is something that the American mentality. The American mentality is, I'll choose to do what I want, even regarding God. And the Catholic Church always said, stop, full stop. You can choose, white bread or rye bread. You can't choose whether you're going to worship God. A lot of people have that in mind, and we have to contradict. We have to say, look, folks, If you don't get down on your knees every Sunday and pray at Mass, you're not fulfilling your obligation as a Catholic, and you're certainly not going to grow deeper in your faith. So the bishops and priests like me, we all have a challenge to change this trend. But, baptisms are down, confessions. Catholic marriages are collapsing in the United States. The number of people seeking marriage, cohabitation is a thing unheard of among Catholics in the 50s, is now the most common practice. These are real challenges. Our bishops need to tackle them.
Well, it's also helpful, I think, if we don't target the faithful and the good Catholics who are attending Mass, who want a reverent, sacred Mass, to say, we're shutting that down and sending you to the gym or go to a fire station and say Mass wherever you can with your children and your wife. This is madness. I'm sorry. We've entered a season of madness. We cannot target the faithful, nor can we target faithful bishops. And when that is done, it's no wonder the flock scatters. And I think that's what we're seeing. And that is a bitter pill for everyone, every Catholic to swallow, no matter where you are on the spectrum. Gentlemen, I'm going to have to leave it there. I wish we could go for another hour, but they won't give me a special. So this is it. You get 1 hour a week. That's it. For commentary and podcasts by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you for being here, gents.